Welcome at the session devoted to the pantomime in language origin, and thank you for being here instead of at the coffee break and perhaps some more exciting place. This session has been set up by Sławek Wacewicz, Casey Lister, and myself. So I will give you a short theoretical introduction to pantomimic hypotheses of on language origin. Casey will talk about more about the empirical research or experimental research and its role in corroborating pantomimic hypotheses, and later you will hear about two more narrowly focused studies. Okay, so this is us, and this is actually a joint project, and I will acknowledge everybody properly at the end of the session. Okay, so pantomimic hypotheses of language origin. What does it mean? These are the views that postulate that the evolutionary history of language contained a phase of pantomimic communication between the system of communication and cognition characteristic of last human ancestor that we shared with non-human apes like chimpanzee, and fully fledged language. So pantomime not me personally who's doing that. Okay, so pantomime is a strong contender in language evolution nowadays. So pantomimic theories has been associated with the names, the two Michaels, Michael Arbib and Michael Tomasello, they expressly use the term pantomime. It is also important for the proponents of the mimesis theory. Sometimes what Cognition should also be interpreted as pantomime, although I think his views are more complex. And interestingly, when we look at the history of language origins, particularly traditional reflection on language origins, a lot of these views, particularly articulated in the Enlightenment, they can be classified as pantomimic. Strange heuristics. Okay. Let's go polysemiotic. But what is a pantomimic theory of language? Well, of course, depends on the definition of pantomime. And in our earlier research, we thought that for the purpose of language origins, the context of language origins, we need a rich definition that would could lead to predictions, also testable predictions, not a lean definition. And we've come up with the following characteristics. That should be mimetic. And so mimesis is a broad concept. Mimesis doesn't have to be communicative. So for example, if I practice a boxing drill, like jab, jab, uppercut, and I'm doing it as a practice, a boxing practice, this is not communicative. But when I use these movements actually to communicate a voxing, that would be communicative use of mimetics. So here, pantomime is a mimetic form of communication. Then it's motivated and non-conventional, so this is, I think, the crucial characteristics. It is improvised, well, specifically because it doesn't rely on communicative conventions, it has to be improvised. It is primarily visual, and here pantomimic theories differ both from gestural theories that mainly focus on gestural communication, but also so-called multimodal theories like Kendon's speech kinetic ensemble or McNeil's growth point that stress the strong integration of vocalization and gesture from the very early beginning of language evolution. They tend to involve whole body, or in fact as much body as is necessary to fulfill the communicative purpose. They are holistic in the sense that pantomime is used mainly to communicate about events. They are self-sufficient, self-standing, so you don't need any other semiotic resources to understand pantomime. And they are semantically open in the sense that you do not, with pantomime, you should be able to communicate different types of meanings. Here, where pantomime differs, for example, from signals that usually are related to specific domains. And importantly here, also communicates about displaced events, for example, events that took place in the past. So here I will concentrate on motivatedness. So what is pantomime? I think most of the people the names of whom and pictures of whom you saw before, and most of the people in the gesture research would say that this is a pantomime. Well, this wasn't a pantomime, but so what was it the pantomime of? Excellent. So what does it show? Well, we are somewhere. So it shows that actually we have expression. So this is the pantomimic expression. We have pantomimic content, that is something that expression stands for. And that the relation, the relation between these two is based on similarity. So here we talk about iconicity, but it also involves asymmetry. That is, this stands for this, but this does not stand for that. So in this, kind of on a minimal level, pantomime lives up to the definition of sign. Okay. I think it is useful in this context to look at the notion of primary iconicity that has been formulated first by Sonneschon. So it reads, similarity between expression and content is sufficient for establishing the relation between them. So this is kind of this self-standing quality of pantomime, that you don't need to have anything else to understand pantomime. And to put it in a context, I don't know, are you familiar with Chinese characters? That's very good. So actually this stands for that. And once you see that this character stands for the river, you may be able to see the similarity. So this is secondary iconicity. So first you need to see the relation in order to see the similarity. So with pantomime, it is different. That is, it's self-standing, and we've had a demonstration of that. It is also related to some of the features. This primary iconicity is related to some of the features that I highlighted when I was defining pantomime on one of the first slides. So it's self-sufficient, just demonstrated. It is improvised, so there is no particular convention or norm that you have to follow. It is primarily visual, but you had sound in the background. It involves the whole body, and it is semantically advanced. I mean, it doesn't require much stretch of an imagination that you can use this type of signal not just for hammering, but also for other actions. Okay, there are also certain gestural characteristics. If we look at the gesture literature, then this type of gesture, we could say, is based on bodily enactment. It involves character viewpoint. So this is the mapping of body to body, that is hand to hand, like the hammering hand, and so forth. So character viewpoint in McNeil's terms, egocentric coordinate system. So it has to do with the peripersonal space. That is what happens with with the actions of your own body, not extra personal space. Like if I do this gesture, this is extra personal because it tells us about something that is not directly related to what is happening with your body. And in terms of, for example, Cornelia Miller's depictive strategy, gestural strategy, this would be called acting. That is reenactment of actual activities. Okay? Okay, but to put it in a semiotically more realistic terms, it is difficult to find a sign that could be completely an icon, if we use Persian definition, or Persian typology, that could be completely an icon or index or symbol in the sense that it relies on a communicative convention. So for example, if we take pointing, this is a type, of course, a typical sign of deictic sign. But there are certain cultural conventions, how you do pointing. So in certain cultures you do not point, you avoid pointing, or you point with the palm of your head. And then there may be a degree of iconicity when the movement actually indicates the movement that you're actually referring to. So on this view, we talk about signs as dominated by one of these components. So this led us to the question whether there is some conventionality in pantomime. So given this robust iconicity, could we suspect or could we see whether there will be some conventions? They do not necessarily have to be communicative conventions. They can be praxic conventions. For example, related to everyday activities. So here we sort of rely or refer to Jordan Zlatev's notion of mimetic schemas, or they can be environmental factors. There's a very famous study by Adam Kendon, or an old study, an interesting one, about emblematic gestures, supportable gestures in Napoli. Because there's, at least this was the conclusion, because there's a lot of noise, and people tend to use gestures more than perhaps in more quiet places. So this is our research question, and very simple, are pantomimic representation culture specific? So I'm going to show you very briefly preliminary results of our study. And so this is the standard guessing game study. So we have actors from two cultures and also guessers from two cultures. We used for actors as the stimulus and for guessers as the target. We use the stimulus that we used in some other study. I won't go into details, but it's supposed to be difficult. So this would be a crowded semantic space. So our actors saw it. We had 16 Polish actors. We had 16 Italian actors. They enacted these 20 events. So it resulted in 640 clips. But we had also a screening procedure. We wanted to eliminate emblematic gestures that are culture specific. So we ended up with 588 films or clips. And we had 60 participants, and that's important. I'm giving you results only from the Polish part of the study. But I think that the results are quite interesting, so we decided to include it. So each participant saw 60 clips, randomized, and And that's it about the design. I hope it's clear. And interestingly, we had to reject our null hypotheses, but not in the direction that we wanted. So actually, Polish participants found it easier to guess Italian clips, not the Polish clips. So this led us to the supposition that perhaps those cultural differences mainly relate to how different cultures are able to pantomime. That in this particular case, that Italians are better mimes than Poles. So that would be the cultural difference. And to give you, so this is the target picture, and to give you an illustration, this is the Italian pantomime, hopefully. Okay, and this is the Polish pantomime. I will finish soon. Okay, so do you see any differences between, so what are the differences? Yeah, but that's difficult to operationalize. So we actually focus on two factors. The use of strategies. So if you look at the Italian, he actually impersonates the agent and the patient. And in fact, we found a difference in the use of this two-person strategy between Italians and Poles. But it turned out then when we calculated the impact of the use of two-person strategy on guessability, we didn't find any effect. So there was a difference between Poles and Italians. It didn't, at least it did not produce a significant effect on guessability. And the other thing was we thought that perhaps the time of pantomime is important. The difference here between Poles and Italians was not significant. You can see that, but it turned out not to be significant. When we look at the impact of guessability on, of time on guessability, it actually turned out to be significant, but we didn't get the difference between Italians and Poles. Okay, so what do we make of it? We don't know, or we don't know yet. These are the things that we are planning to do. So finish our study, then to get the Italian data, and we assume that there will be the difference in guessability in favor of Italians, not Polish clips. But also do qualitative and quantitative analysis, for example, looking at the span of gestures, which may account for expressivity of gestures, but also perhaps at redundancy, which might help. We are also planning motion capture, which could be good for example, of the study of span of movements. We are going to use different semantic roles and verb types, perhaps not just transitive actions, but transitive events, but intransitive events, or perhaps trying static verbs, and different mimetic schemas. Like eating, for example, is a mimetic schema, but also jumping is a mimetic schema. But you know, we expect there would be a greater cultural difference, for example, with eating, things that are related more to cultural norms. So before I say thank you, I have to acknowledge all the people. So this is the Rome team, or the core of the Rome team. It's actually sitting here, so you can recognize faces. This is Jordan Zlatev, who helped a lot with the theoretical part. And this is us. So the young researchers you will see, and Sławek, you don't need a picture because he's very famous, and this is our grand giving body. It doesn't have a picture, but it has a logo. Thank you.